Welcome back again, students. Today's session is drawing of maxillary right permanent first molar. When we draw the maxillary first molar, the magnification factor for this tooth is 3 times normal, not as usual 4 times. So all the measurements of the tooth should be multiplied 3 times the normal. Before we start drawing the maxillary right permanent, we should read well in the textbook about all features of the maxillary first permanent molar. The maxillary first permanent molar has 5 cusps: mesiobuccal cusp, distobuccal cusp, mesiolingual, distolingual cusp, and the 5th cusp is cusp of Carabelli. And also it has 3 roots. 2 on the buccal side, we call them mesiobuccal and distobuccal, and we have a palatal root. If you look at the table of measurements, you can see that for the length of the root we have 2 measurements. One under the letter B, which refers to the length of the 2 buccal roots, and one is L, refers for the length of the palatal root. And as you can see here, that the palatal root is longer than the buccal roots by 1 millimeter. As usual, when we start drawing, the first thing is to divide the paper into 4 squares, and in each part we will draw one aspect of the tooth. The first aspect that we will draw is the buccal aspect, and as usual we will write down the name of the aspect. On the right side it will be mesial, on our left side it will be distal. Then we will draw a horizontal line representing the occlusal plane. On that line we will draw another vertical line at right axis to the first one. This vertical line represents the midline of the tooth, and all the measurements will be around this midline to the right and to the left. Then after we put the vertical line, we should go the length of the crown, which is for the first molar is 7.5 millimeters. The length of the crown is 7.5 millimeters multiplied by 3, it will be 22.5 millimeters. So we will increase the length of the crown into 2. We will draw it on 23 millimeters. From this point upward is 23 millimeters. Then we have to go the root lengths. We have to mark 2 points. One for the 2 buccal roots on the length of 12 millimeter multiplied by 3 will be 36, and the other line for the palatal root, which is on the length of 39 millimeters. Then we have to divide the thirds of the crown. 3 divided by 3, it will be 7.6. So we will divide the thirds into 8, 7, 8, meaning that the cervical third will be 8 millimeter, the middle third 7 millimeter, and the occlusal third on 8 millimeter. After that, we have to know the mesiodistal width of the crown at cervix, which is 8 millimeters multiplied by 3, it will be 24. So I have to go 12 millimeter mesially and put a mark, and I will go distally 12 millimeters and put a mark for the cervical points. Then I have to know the mesiodistal of the width of the crown, the maximum width of the crown between the 2 contact points, which is 10 millimeter multiplied by 3, 30. So I have to go 15 millimeter mesially and 15 millimeter distally. The vertical position is the position of the contact points. As you can see here, the mesial contact point lies on the junction between the middle and the occlusal third, while the distal contact point lies at the middle of the crown. So from this point, at the junction between the occlusal and middle third, I have to go 15 millimeters to the mesial, while the distal contact point at the middle of the crown, I will go 10 millimeters toward the distal. Then I have to connect the cervical point with the mesial contact point, the cervical point distally with the distal contact point, the shape and the form of the lines that I have to draw, I have to go back to the textbook and see the description of these lines, whether they are straight or convex or slightly straight or slightly convex, and draw according to the description. From the buccal side, we can see the two cusps that are facing us. The main cusps are the mesiobuccal cusp and the distobuccal cusp, which means that each cusp has a cusp tip. What is the relation of the cusp tip to the midline, and where we are going to place, or the exact position of the cusp tip? As we said earlier, that from the distal contact point to the midline, the width is 15 millimeter, and between these two points I have to mark this area here. This represents the cusp tip of the distobuccal cusp. On the mesial side, the same thing. From the midline to the mesial contact point, in the middle I will put a mark on the occlusal plane. This represents the position of the mesiobuccal cusp tip. Then I have to join these points together from the mesial contact point to the cusp tip, and from the distal contact point to the cusp tip. Between the two cusp tips in the midline, I have to go 1/4 the length of the crown. This area will be the area where the two cusps will meet buccally. You can see here, from the mesial contact point to the cusp tip, from the distal contact point to the cusp tip, and then I have to go 1/4 the crown length, but not on the midline. I have to go more toward the distal side because the mesiobuccal cusp is wider than the distobuccal cusp. And this line, which goes downward to the middle of the crown in the center, represents the buccal developmental groove. This area which appears here is the distal part of the distolingual cusp. Can we see other cusps from this aspect? Yes, we can see the mesiolingual cusp. We will draw it in the background, as you can see here. And notice that the cusp tip is above the occlusal plane. Why? Because all the cusps, the three cusps, the mesiobuccal, the distobuccal, the distolingual, has the same length, except for the mesiolingual cusp, which is longer than the other cusps by 0.5 millimeter. Means that when we are going to draw it, it should be longer by 2 millimeter on our drawing paper. And then we have to draw the cervical line. Now moving to the roots. How many roots I can see from the buccal aspect? From the buccal aspect, I can see the three roots. I can see the mesiobuccal root, the distobuccal root, and the palatal root. Where is the apex of each one? As you can see here, that the mesiobuccal root apex runs with the cusp tip of the mesiobuccal cusp, and the distobuccal cusp tip runs with the distobuccal root. And in the middle is the apex of the palatal root, which is longer or higher by 1 millimeter than the other two. Root starts as a one unit. We call it earlier a root trunk. We call it a root trunk. Then it divides into the three roots: the mesiobuccal, the distobuccal, and the palatal root. This area of bifurcation has a place or a measurement. You can see here the apex of each root. It runs in line with the corresponding cusp tip. I have to place the position of the bifurcation point. Where is the bifurcation point from the buccal aspect? Bifurcation point from the buccal aspect lies on the length of 4 millimeter from the cervical line along the root length. So 4 multiplied by 3, so I have to go 12 millimeters. Put a mark. This area here is the area of the bifurcation from the buccal side. The root trunk has the two sides of the root trunk are parallel, then they taper toward each corresponding root. See here, this is the area of the root trunk, the bifurcation point, the mesiobuccal root, the distobuccal root, and the palatal root. The two mesiobuccal and the distobuccal root looks like the hands of a player. Is there anything that I have to draw? Yes, there is a developmental groove runs from the bifurcation point to the cervical point. By this, my image from the buccal aspect has finished. From the lingual aspect, the same divisions: the mesial contact point, the distal contact point. From the lingual aspect, how many cusps am I going to see? I can see the cusps which faces me, the mesiolingual cusp, which is the longest and the biggest of all cusps, and I will see the distolingual cusp, and also I will see the cusp of Carabelli, which lies on the lingual surface of the mesiolingual cusp. As you can see here, the width of the mesiolingual cusp is different from the distolingual cusp. The total mesio width of the crown is 30 millimeters. 3/5 of this measurement goes for the mesiolingual cusp, which is 18 millimeters, and 2/5 goes for the distolingual cusp, which is 12 millimeters. So from the area of the maximum contour mesially, I have to go 18 millimeters toward the midline, crossing the midline, put a mark, then go vertically. Here, this is the area where representing the width of the mesiolingual cusp. Then the remaining area from the distal contact point to this point goes for the distolingual cusp. The area where they will join in the middle is at 1/4 the crown length. From the mesial contact point to this point, 18 millimeter. In the middle, I will put a mark for the cusp tip of the mesiolingual cusp, and from this point to the distal contact point, 12 millimeter. In the middle, I will put a mark for the cusp tip of the distolingual cusp. I will draw first the distolingual cusp, which is convex in shape all around, and it is confluent with the cusp slopes and continuous with a developmental groove on the lingual surface, which is the lingual developmental groove. As you can see here, this is the developmental groove confluent with the cusp slopes, with the cusp ridges, and goes with the distal contact point to the cervical line. Then, as we said, that the cusp tip of the mesiolingual cusp is longer than the other cusps by 2 millimeters, so I have to put the mark not on the point on the occlusal plane. I have to go more in an extra 2 millimeters, put a mark for the cusp tip of the mesiolingual cusp. And then from the mesial contact point to the cusp tip to 1/4 the length of the crown, I will join the two cusps together. By this, the two cusps are seen. The mesiolingual, the biggest and the widest and the longest, the distolingual cusp. Where is the cusp of Carabelli? The cusp of Carabelli lies on the lingual surface, on the mesiolingual cusp. Position of the cusp of Carabelli lies on 2 millimeters from the mesiolingual cusp tip. So from the mesiolingual cusp tip, I have to go 6 millimeters downward, put a mark, and draw this arrow representing the cusp of Carabelli. I have to draw the cervical line. How many roots I can see from the lingual aspect? As we said, we have main root is the palatal root. It starts from the cervical point to the apex to the distal to the mesial side. Also, I can see parts of the distobuccal root, only this part of the distobuccal root, and I will see the mesiobuccal root. The whole mesial side of the mesiobuccal root, I will see it starting from the cervical point to the apex, to the position of the apex of each root for the mesobuccal and the distobuccal. I have to go about 7 to 8 millimeters mesially and distally, put a mark and place the apex of each one of these two roots. And also on the root there is a developmental depression on the palatal root, runs from the middle of the root to the cervical third of the crown. I will draw it like this. For drawing the mesial and the distal aspect, at first we have to place the cervical measurement of the crown buccolingually, which is 10 millimeter multiplied by 3, so it will be 30, 15 buccally and 15 lingually, 15 to the lingual side and 15 to the buccal side. The maximum contour buccally lies at 1 millimeter, about 1 millimeter from the cervical line, while lingually the maximum contour lies at the middle of the crown. What is the measurements buccolingually? The maximum width buccolingually of the crown is 11 millimeter multiplied by 3, so it will be 33. Divided in 2, we'll draw
17 millimeter buccally and 17 millimeter lingually.
Buccally, the maximum contour buccally, I have to go 3 millimeter from the cervical point and put a point for the maximum contour buccally, while lingually at the middle of the crown I have to go
17 millimeter,
put a mark for the maximum contour lingually. Then I have to join the lines together, the cervical point to the maximum contour buccally, and from the cervical point to the maximum contour lingually. Sudden change from the cervical point to the maximum contour buccally, we didn't run long distance. This we call it the cervical ridge. You can see here two new things: 1/3 functional cusp and non-functional cusp 1/6. What is the meaning of these two words? It means that for the maxillary teeth, the functional cusps are the lingual cusps. The two lingual cusps are functional cusps that comes in the center of the mandibular teeth. That's why we call them functional. The two buccal cusps, the mesobuccal and the distobuccal cusps, are non-functional because they do not occlude with the center of the opposing tooth. The rule says that for the functional cusps, the tip of the functional cusp lies on 1/3 the total buccolingual width of the crown, while the tip of the non-functional cusps lies on 1/6 of the total buccolingual width of the crown. The total buccolingual width of the crown, the maximum width of the crown, is 33 millimeters. 1/3 of this measurement is 11, and 1/6 of this measurement is about 6 millimeters. And because we are drawing maxillary tooth, the functional cusps are the lingual cusps and the non-functional cusps are the buccal cusps. When we are going to draw a mandibular molar, the opposing will be the functional cusps will be the buccal cusps, and the non-functional cusps will be what? The lingual cusp. The position of the tip of the non-functional cusps is 1/6 of the total buccolingual width of the crown, which we said it is about 6 millimeters. So from the maximum contour buccally, I have to go 6 millimeters toward the center, the midline. Then I go vertically, I put a mark for the functional cusp tips. From the lingual side, the position of the tip is at 1/3 the total buccolingual width of the crown, which is 11 millimeters. So I have to go for the maximum contour lingually 11 millimeter. Then I go vertically till it bisects the occlusal plane. This will be the position of the tip of the functional cusps. Whenever I see the mesiolingual cusp, always I have to draw it higher by 2 millimeters than the occlusal plane. As you can see here, it is not on the occlusal plane, it is higher by 2 millimeters. This is the position of the buccal cusp tips, and this is the position of the lingual cusp tip. Then in between these 2 points, between the cusp tip, the buccal cusp tip, and the lingual cusp tip in the middle, I have to go 1/4 to 1/5 the crown length and put a mark at the area of the mesial marginal ridge where the cusp lobes will meet. Here is the middle, 1/4 to 1/5 the total crown length, put a mark, then continue the form buccally and lingually, and then join the cusps together in this area, which is the mesial marginal ridge. Say that whenever I see the mesiolingual cusp, it should be higher by 2 millimeters or higher than the other cusps. Also, I have to search for the cusp of Carabelli. The cusp of Carabelli lies on 2 millimeters from the mesiolingual cusp tip. So I have to go 2 millimeters downward, multiplied by t, so it will be 6. I have to go 6 millimeters downward. Then I will have to move horizontally here, where it bisects the lingual side. I will draw an arrow representing the cusp of Carabelli. This is the width, and then draw this form for the cusp of Carabelli. Don't forget to draw the cervical line, which is 3 millimeters on the mesial side. Then I have to draw the apex of each root. From this aspect, what are the roots that I'm going to see? I will see the palatal root, and also I will see the mesiobuccal root. You can see here the mesiobuccal root in line with the mesiobuccal cusp, while the palatal root is in line with the tip of the cusp of Carabelli. There is a bifurcation point where the two roots will separate. The bifurcation point, the length of the bifurcation line is at 3 millimeters from the cervical line. So I have to go 3 millimeters upward, put a mark. Don't forget to multiply these numbers. 3 by 3, it will be 9. So I have to go from cervical line 9 millimeters, put a mark. The bifurcation will be about this level. But the width of the mesiobuccal root is bigger than the palatal root. The width of the mesiobuccal root is about 2/3 the cervical width of the crown. I said 30 millimeters, so 2/3 will be 20 millimeters. From the buccal cervical point, I have to go 20 millimeters toward the center, then I have to go upward 9 millimeters. This area, this exact area, is the position of the bifurcation point, or the start of the bifurcation point. Then I have to continue to draw the sides of the two roots. This is the starting point of the mesiobuccal root, and then I have to draw the palatal root. The palatal root has a description which we call it the banana shape. By this I have finished my mesial aspect image. Moving to the distal side, the same point, the buccal, the lingual. The functional cusp is the lingual, so I have to go 11 millimeters downward, put a mark for the distolingual cusp. Then from the maximum contour buccally, I have to go 6 millimeters downward to place the position of the distobuccal cusp. In between 1/4 to 1/5 the area of the distal marginal ridge. This is from the lingual side, the buccal side, and then join them together in the area of the distal marginal ridge. Here is another line drawn inside the gross outline, which means that when I see a line like this, I will understand that this side, which is the distal side, is narrower than the mesial side. From the distal side, the distobuccal root in line with the distobuccal cusp. But for the palatal root, I have to go to the drawing of the mesial aspect and see the distance from the midline to the apex of the palatal root on the first drawing, and the same measurement I apply it here. Then I have to draw the area of the bifurcation, and the area bifurcation from the distal aspect is on 5 millimeters from the cervical point, 5 by 3, so it will be 15 millimeters in the midline exactly. And then I have to draw the two roots, the palatal root and the line on the background, this line for the mesiobuccal root and the line inside for the distobuccal root, which means that this distal side of the crown and the root is narrower than the mesial side. Moving to the occlusal aspect, I have to draw the usual box The measurements are mesiodistally 30 millimeters, buccolingually 34 millimeters. Here the mesial side, distal side, buccally in the front, lingually in the back. Inside, I will draw the occlusal aspect, which looks rhomboidal in shape. The first thing, from the buccal aspect, or from the buccal side, as we have drawn the buccal aspect, we said that the position of the tip is at the middle, from the midline to the mesial side. In the middle, I will put a mark. From the midline to the distal side, I will put a mark as a guide for the two buccal cusps. From the lingual side, the mesiolingual cusp 3/5, while the distolingual cusp is 2/5. From the mesial side, I have to go 18 millimeter, put a mark in the middle, I guide for the mesiolingual cusp tip, and from this point to the distal side is 12 millimeter. On sixth, I will put a mark for the position of the distolingual cusp. Then I have to draw like this the form of the crown occlusally, which we said it is rhomboidal in shape. Then I have to draw inside this the occlusal table. As we said earlier, we have the functional cusp tips and the non-functional cusps. From this point we have marked earlier, we have to go 11 millimeter, put a mark for the tip of the mesiolingual cusp. And from this point, I have to go another 11 meter, put a mark for the distolingual cusp tip. For the two buccal cusps, the same thing, because they are non-functional. I have to go 6 millimeter, put a mark, 6 millimeter in the middle, put a mark. Then I have to draw the cusp slopes of the four cusps and join them together in the area of the mesial marginal ridge and the distal marginal ridge. Then I have to draw two circles. The first one from the lingual side. As we said, we have a lingual developmental groove starting with the lingual side of the crown and runs occlusally between the two mesiolingual cusps, and then it joins the occlusal developmental grooves and runs in a distal direction toward the distal triangular fossa. From the buccal side, the same thing. From the buccal developmental groove runs occlusally between the two buccal cusps, and then joins the central groove on the occlusal table, and then runs toward the mesial side in the area of the mesial triangular fossa. Then I have to draw the cusp ridges of each one and the transfers and the oblique ridges. The transverse ridge between the mesiobuccal cusp and the mesiolingual cusp, while the oblique ridge is between the distobuccal cusp and the distal side of the mesiolingual cusp. So the mesiolingual cusp is the biggest, the largest in all dimensions and also in length, and it has two ridges, a transverse ridge and an oblique ridge. A transverse ridge between this cusp and the opposing one, which is the mesiobuccal cusp, and the transverse ridge between this cusp and the one in cross, which is the distobuccal cusp. Also, don't forget to draw the triangular fossa on the distal side, the mesial side, and on the mesiolingual cusp, I have to draw the cusp of the carabelli. This slide shows the 5 aspects: the buccal, the lingual, mesial, distal. You can see the occlusal. I hope you enjoyed my lecture. See you next week.